piloting in England. I was in the equivalent of your ROTC, same kind of deal. Soloed at 15 and been flying since then. And now I'm the glider operations officer for the gliders for the Civil Air Patrol. So we run a couple of gliders and 2 tow planes out of Chehalis. And just to give you an example on the issue that we're talking about losing membership, last year I soloed 7 students. We had 2 make private pilot after that. And we've had a couple of kids this year. One went to West Point, a woman went to West Point as a helicopter pilot, and another, one of the kids got accepted at Colorado Springs. So if you want a place to find some recruits, that's a good place to go. And in fact, the cadet, the person that had your grant last year, Garrett Stanley, I think some of you know, he was one of my students, and he's a Civil Air Patrol cadet who went through the glider program first and later on got his power license. He'd still rather fly the gliders, but it's okay. Anyway, it's nice for you guys to invite me because to share a passion of mine. I've been doing this for a long time. And how many people have actually flown a glider in this room? Okay, well, that's pretty good, right? How many people have flown a power plane which became a glider? Well, that's good too, because actually it's a good idea to practice in one without an engine when you take off, because you feel a bit more comfortable about doing it after you've taken off, if you've had a little experience with a glider. So I'm going to talk a little bit about gliders, and one of the things I've done is I've been a competition pilot, so we actually race these things. And there's some remarkable stuff that I know most people don't know about gliders, about the performance of them. Current day performance of modern gliders is pretty remarkable. And I would guess that most people in this room think of a glider as just one step above a lawn dart. You know, thunk, you can actually get far enough to make a turn and get back to the airport. They're not really like that. So we're going to talk about gliders in general. And if I could have the next slide, please, Jim. This is some performance information that most people don't know about. For instance, let's take the red line on a modern day 22-meter glider. It's about 150. We've got gliders now that have a red line of close to 200 knots. And what is a Cessna 172, about 135. I know there's some 172 drivers in here, so if that number's wrong, you can correct me. Boeing 747 is about 750. And if you're at 5,000 feet, 1 mile high, and you're in a 22-meter glider, you can go 60 miles. And I've got one person in this room, and I can attest to that, because we've done that. 12 miles maybe in a 172, and if it's nice and clean and you washed it yesterday, and it's not raining now, you might get 12 miles. 747, remarkably enough, will go about 20 miles, 20 plus miles from that altitude. And the best glide in a glider is about 70 in a 22-meter glider, is about 70, 75 knots. Cessna 172, 70 knots or a bit less. Boeing, it's pretty high. And yeah, wingspans. Now, of course, we have a bit different wingspan. We're double the typical wingspan of a light airplane, so but not nearly as big as the 747. Gross weight ran under 2,000 pounds for a 2-seater. And the service ceiling on there says 49,500 feet, but actually now the current world record is pretty close to 51,000. So I have to assume that the service ceiling is at least that, since it's been done. So the performances of modern gliders are a long way from being a lawn dart. Let's put it that way. Next slide. These are the current world records. Now the first one, I'm hoping people will go, wow. Because this just happened this month out of Minden, Nevada, just south of Reno. And we have a guy who's an ex-F-16 pilot by the name of Jim Payne, who flew 1,800 miles at 155 miles an hour from a 3,000-foot launch out of Minden. Okay. Now, the actual course that he flew, I flew myself, because one of the things you get for soaring, if you do a 1,000-kilometer flight, you get a little pin. It's a bragging rights, you know. I never quite made it, but I made the same flight, which was 600 miles, and it took me over 8.5, it was about 8.5 hours to complete that flight. He did that 3 times in 12 hours, half of which was at night, because he started at noon, and he had lights on his airplane and everything, and finished at midnight.
Where is that circuit?
He went from Minden up to a little place north of Reno called Air Sailing, which is up by Pyramid Lake, south to Inyukurn, back to Minden, and did that 3 times around.
Basically on the east side of the Sierra.
On the east side of the Sierras, yeah, all in Mountain Wave. Some of the stuff we've seen coming up today. Mountain Wave is, we'll talk about that. So you see that in fact the 1,000 speed limit was done 128 miles an hour in Argentina, and Fawcett broke the altitude record to 50,699 about 3 years ago. He's since passed away, got in an accident in the Sierras, which is unfortunate. But they had a specially equipped airplane, and they were wearing spacesuits. Back in 1989, 7 of us were out of Stead Air Force Base, made it to 40,000 feet without any spacesuits. I wouldn't want to do that again, but it took a long time before that record was broken, and the only way they broke it was to, which I think is kind of cheating, to wear a spacesuit in a glider. And the duration, the last record was set in 53, which is by a guy named Paul Bickle, and he quit after 54 hours because he ran out of food. But, and before you ask, we use a little plastic bag. Next slide. Okay, so this was the record by Jim Payne. So April the 5th. Oops, April the 5th it was. I don't know how I did that.
April the 54th.
Yeah,
That's July something.
This year, this was just very recently. Inyukurn, Air Sailing, Minden, twice around. 2,900 kilometers. That's 1,800 statute miles. Pretty amazing. 155, and took him all day. That's Jim. He has the glider on the left is the one similar to the one he did the record in, and the other one that's behind him is his single-seater, which of course happily got their tail number F-16, which is what he used to fly. He's an ex-Navy pilot. Next slide. Okay, we have 3 ways of getting it up. The top left-hand picture, we use a winch, and if you haven't had a winch launch, it's better than a knee ride in Disneyland, because it's 0 to 3,000 feet in 6 seconds. You get behind a winch and you get to about 200 feet, pull the stick back, and you go like that. And then when you get to the top, you pull the release, and go find a thermal. The other way, the most common way, which we use mostly, is an aero tow, which is at the bottom, where you have another airplane, 200 feet of rope, and you learn how to fly formation for a little while. You know, it's a little easier because you have a rope that keeps you the same distance from the airplane. You don't have to worry about that part of it, at least. And then the more sophisticated way, and I had one of these for a little while, is an auxiliary powered sailplane. It's not some of these things where you see with a prop on the front, which stows away or whatever. This thing has a retractable snowmobile engine which comes out. It's about 60 horsepower, good enough to take off. It's nice when you run out of lift and wind and ideas all at the same time, because you just pop that engine out and away you go wherever you want to go. An interesting thought, if you think about a glider with a 50 to 1 glider ratio and it weighs 2,000 pounds, how much thrust does it take to push it through the air? Okay, it's about, what's that, 2/5? It's about 40 pounds. Less than 40 pounds of thrust to fly that thing. It's 70 knots. Next slide. There are several kinds of lift, and we'll talk about a few of them, but some of them you know, like we've got today, we've got some nice cues. Probably not a lot of lift under those because it's kind of ragged, but typical way we go someplace is you find a nice cumulus, because they mark the thermals, and you circle up into the cloud and you go like hell to the next cloud and keep you so you can make progress that way. And that's called cross-country thermal soaring. The trick is to pick the clouds that are actually developing lift that haven't started to decay yet when the air is going down instead of up. And so I fly around with Duncan quite a lot, and I said, that's a good one, that's a good one, and he just ignores me. He's got that pain, he's got that.
You can't maintain altitude.
That's right. So next one. And if you've got any questions, don't worry, just chat. Typically, we fly up in the desert, you know. We fly out of a freighter. We have a camp every year with the cadets. And we fly out of a freighter. We get some, it's not unusual to get to 14,000 feet over there in thermal. And they have a lot of dust devils. And we fly in dust devils. We don't go around them like you guys do. We go, there's a dust devil, shoot! And you go straight for them. And the result is, they're, even if you're a couple of thousand feet off the ground, they're very narrow. They're not big, broad things like you see with these cues. They're very narrow. And the only way you stay in them, you're racked up at 60 degrees angle of bank, you're flying 5 knots off the stall speed. Okay? So you have to be good to be able to do that. There's some other issues with long-wing airplanes, which we'll talk about later. But it's not unusual to be sitting there in a thermal flying 2 or 3 Gs for several minutes while you climb up to the top of that dust devil. Okay, next one. Okay, ridge soaring. I kind of like this. You get the wind, blows up a hill, and as long as you're close enough to the hill, there's some lift because there's a vertical component of the wind. And I made a flight down of College, Pennsylvania on the Alleghenies, 300 miles round trip, and I was never more than about 150 feet off the ground all the time. It's strong, you know, the Alleghenies go forever, and 300 to 150 miles out and return, and you're just bombing along, but pretty close to red line, and over the trees, you know, different kind of flying than you guys. Next. That's a shot of, actually that's me flying off of the Pacific coast down near San Diego. It's a very famous place where they now just fly a lot of hang gliders and stuff. But yes, sir?
You do these in formation with people typically, or these are just unusual for the pictures?
No, we do a lot of, one of the things that happens with gliders, of course, is you go up to a place and there's only one thermal within the vicinity of the airport, so before long it's like moths around a candle. You have 30 or 40 gliders in the same thermal, and most of them at the same altitude. So you get used to flying in close, you're looking up and you can read the label on the guy's bureau, it says it's 40 pounds PSI, you know. So you get used to flying a little closer, and of course the fact is, you know, when you're behind the tow plane, you've got to learn how to fly behind the tow plane, which is not as easy as it sounds.
Is there a common frequency that you guys are talking on?
Yeah, we use one, well, different places use different frequencies, but typically it's 123.3. And if you go up to a freighter or you're down in the Minden Valley area, you'll hear people talking at 123.3 most of the time.
So if you see somebody close by, it's pretty easy to contact them and let
yes.
them know if you're in the area too.
Right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Huh.
So that's an example of ridge soaring right there. A strong offshore breeze. That's the Napa Valley. Left side is Vacaville, and the right side goes into Napa Valley, which is nice because you can accidentally get shot down and you have no more lift, so you land at the winery.
Darn. When that happens.
And they usually it's sort of usual for the glider to come in, you know, it's all grass and stuff. So they usually serve you a nice lunch and a free glass of wine. And you trailer it home. And next. This is mountain wave soaring. This is serious stuff because we're going to talk a little bit more about this. Has anybody flown mountain wave? Okay, good.
Not in the sailplane, but
inadvertently.
Inadvertently, yes. Well, as you can see, you know, what happens is it's called a hydraulic jump, and you get it's kind of like the same thing as water in a river. You've got a big log in the bottom of the river, and the water flows over it, and the log's only a foot diameter, and the river is 20 foot deep, but the wave is still on top of the, you know, it's 20-foot ratio of 20 to 1 or so. So the wave propagates over the top, and they've had the U-2s detect 500 foot a minute of wave lift at 75,000 feet. So it's just a question of having the right equipment to get there, and you could do that in a glider. There are certain issues with flying in wave, one of which is you get really high in more ways than one. The other thing is that on the lee side of the hill, as some of you power pilots probably know, there's the worst turbulence you've ever seen in your life. And I've hit, I used to own a Pilatus B4 glider, and I hit about 6.5 Gs in one of those and almost put my head through the canopy and then put my backside through the bottom of the airplane, bam, like this. And we had back in the 80s, we had a Pawnee come apart in the rotor. It's pretty bad. And one of the things that happens is you can see those two rotors on that picture are fairly far apart, but quite often they'll move fairly close together. And if you get between one of those, you've got 600 or 700 feet a minute on that wing and 600 or 700 feet a minute that way on the other wing. And it's pretty hard to stay with the blue side up, you know. So, but most of gliders that are built to withstand, they're mostly around 6 to 7 G limitations on them, as distinct from a typical single engine power plane, which is a little bit not quite so tough. Okay, next slide. Can you go back on that one? Yeah, that was taken actually by my son. Took a guy from Iopa on a joyride, and that is a rotor cloud, and I can tell you right now, you do not want to be in that. That's pretty tough stuff. Next one. And this is actually that is my son, and he's flying. That's at Minden. He's got a pressure oxygen system on above 30,000 feet. You can't just use a rebreather oxygen because the partial pressure of the oxygen in your bloodstream is less than the ambient pressure at that altitude. So even though you breathe 100% oxygen, you die of hypoxia. Okay, so the only way you can survive is you need a pressurized oxygen system, so the oxygen pressure is higher than the ambient.
So you're in Class A airspace up there.
You got it, right.
Yeah. So you're talking to...
We're talking to ATC, yeah. And several places where we do this kind of stuff, they have a memorandum of understanding with the FAA, and we get up to 17,999 and call on the phone or on the radio and say, open the window. And they're pretty cooperative generally. So they'll open a window up to 30, and then you get up there and they'll open it some more. And the strange thing is when they open the window up, the jets fly underneath, which can be really disconcerting. Okay, next one. So FAA says 12.5. If it's more than 30 minutes at 14,000 feet, you know all the rules probably better than I do. So your conventional rebreather is good to 30. Above that, you're really, in fact, I'd say 25,000. You're being a bit over ambitious to be flying with a rebreather at 25 for any length of time. And at 50,000, your blood boils at 98.4, which is your body temperature. So you're in serious trouble. That's why you need a spacesuit. So the useful consciousness, if you're at 25,000 feet and you have an oxygen failure, you've got 3 or 4 minutes to figure it out. At 40,000 feet, in 30 seconds, it's over. You're not corpus mentis enough to figure out how to turn and do anything with the oxygen. So it's high altitude flying in wave is a high risk kind of endeavor. Okay, next. And this is a little bit of humor. But sometimes that's what it feels like. My flight instructor, he said, when you're in the wave and you're in the rotor, he's just trying to keep the tow plane in sight. That's it. And if it's out of sight, you pull the release. So I did that for him with an inverted Pawnee. He's still in sight, but it's not blue side up. Okay, next. We suffer from some of the problems in gliders that they encountered in the U-2, because the U-2 is a jet-powered glider, basically, big long wings and with a jet engine. And what happens is as you increase altitude on a wave day, usually what happens is you have a high wind gradient. So at ridge level, at 5,000 feet AGL, you may have 40, 50 knots at the ski resorts or whatever. And by the time you get to 25,000 feet, you're looking at 100 knots. And at 35,000 feet, might be close to 200 knots, okay? So the limitation, when you've got a high wind gradient like that, the limitation on the altitude that you can achieve is the VNE of the airplane, because once you get to the VNE and that equals the wind speed, you start going backwards. So you can't stay in the lift because the lift is over here, and as you go backwards you go into the sink. So we do a lot of flying where we go like this in the wave. The other problem you have is, you know, altitude increases, air density increases, and the VNE decreases. And with most gliders with big long wings, the problem with the VNE is flutter. So if that thing flutters with those big long wings that go sinusoidal, they usually come apart pretty quick. So you don't want to get anywhere near that. So the other limitation is the VNE becomes your stall speed. And in the U-2s that happens at about 80,000 feet. They have a 5-knot window at around 80,000 feet, where if they go any slower it falls out of the sky, and if they go any faster it comes apart, which must be a pretty stressful place to be.
That's true in the powered world too.
Yeah, right.
It's one of the things I learned when I got the turbo normalizer on the Bonanza, is that at around 25,000 to 26,000 feet,
yeah,
the V&E and the green
meet. Yeah, that's it. You're flying in that little window, coughing corner. Yeah, not a good place to be. And I said the U-2s have detected lift at 70,000 feet with wind less than 100 knots. So it's feasible that you could actually get there in a glider. Okay, next one. Well, there's some other problems with flying at altitude. We don't have engines, so we don't have heaters, and we don't have enough electricity to have an electric heater. So the temperature at 30,000 feet is minus 55. You're sitting nicely in a nice greenhouse, so the part of you that's in the greenhouse is pretty good, but your feet are lumps of ice. So you have to wear electric socks and stuff like that to counteract that. If you have any moisture, I mean, I know you power pilots don't ever do that, but it's been known for people to go down to the local oxyacetylene dealer and fill up their tank with regular oxygen or medical oxygen, which has got water vapor in it. And if you have water vapor in your oxygen, it freezes in the regulator, and the regulator dies. So you have to make sure you have absolutely zero moisture in your oxygen. The other problem is most gliders they don't have cables, they have push rods made of aluminum. They shrink, and they're designed to be a certain length, and now they're a bit shorter, and they break the bulkheads and stuff that they're retained in, and the control rods don't work anymore, we've had that happen to a couple of places. They break the mountings. The wing retaining pins, the wings go together like this. There's two parts of the wing like that. There's steel pins go through, and the pins shrink and they get loose. So if you don't have them properly safety wired, and we had that happen in Minden, a guy did that, and he pulled up, and he'd been in the wave for several hours. He pulled up vertically, and both the wing pins fell out, and the wings came off. He survived because he had a parachute. But there are other problems like gel coat cracks, rapid temperature change. If you've got anything fiberglass like a boat, and heat, cold, eventually it cracks all the fiberglass. We had one strange incident where the guy had water ballast without any glycol in it, and the water ballast froze. It was an airplane with a wet wing. It didn't have a bag inside, it had a wet wing. So the water froze inside the wing and separated the skin from the spar, and he was flying around for about half an hour wondering why he didn't feel he got really good control of this thing until he figured out what had happened and bailed out.
Ian?
Yeah?
What's the concept of water ballast?
We'll come to that, but it's basically roller skates go downhill faster if they're heavier, and the hill slope is defined by the aerodynamics. So the heavier you make it, the faster it goes. But it's too heavy to land, so you use water so you can get rid of it. Okay? We'll come back to that. Other than that, flying at high speed is fast and it's fun. It can be dangerous. So, next. Okay, so I just talked about sailplanes. We've kind of addressed some of these, but one of the things about sailplanes, you have no engine, obviously, so you don't have to worry about that, which is nice. When I get in a power plane, I'm telling you, I'm looking around saying, well, we can land over there, we can land over there. I'm constantly looking for a good place to put it down, which you guys don't do very often. But there's some bad things about it, and that is that The typical sailplane has no washout in the wing. If you look at your plane, the incidence changes with the span, so that generally speaking you've got a higher angle of incidence inboard than you do outboard. There's twist in the wing. So when that puppy stalls, you get all that nice burble, you feel it, and the inboard part of the wing stalls first, and it gets a bit mushy, and you know it's going to happen. Well, if you take an ASW20, it's an absolutely straight wing, has no change in incidence whatsoever. And what's happening is you're flying at a steep angle, very close to the stall speed. This wing's going a lot slower than that wing. That one stalls first, okay? And when it stalls, it just goes bang, and it stops flying. There's no warning, there's no anything else, rolls on its back, and unless you do something pretty quick, it will spin inverted. So they're unforgiving. They require, you know, constant attention to your flying skills. And a big problem with it is, since there are no power and no fuel limitations, it's not unusual getting a glider. In fact, a 5-hour flight in a glider is an entry-level accomplishment. How many of you guys have flown for 5 hours in your airplane lately? Most of you at your age don't have the bladder to do it anyway. Okay, so one of the penalties is that you get up there, it's a beautiful day, and you start flying, it's 12 o'clock, and the cues start popping, and off you go. And it's 7 o'clock at night, and you don't realize that you're dehydrated, probably slightly hypoxic, and you're so fatigued that you're retarded, okay? And that's an issue with gliders, is that people, you know, they just get too tired, and it can be dangerous. Next. You don't get any rest either, because like Duncan's airplane, when you kind of lose it and you're not with it anymore, you can press that little button that says auto, and auto takes over, and you don't do anything anymore. You don't have one of those in a glider, and so you just have to have major concentration, because the first objective is keeping the air. You got to keep the glider in. You don't have to worry about that with a power plane, but in a glider, you constantly, if you don't do anything, you're going to be on the ground in a few minutes. So you better know where you're going to land, and you better be judging your energy, and you have a constant trade-off between getting to where you want to go and getting to where the lift is, because the lift is over there, but I want to go there, and that means, you know, maybe follow the terrain. So you're constantly making those trade-offs. The fact that you're cold can hasten hypoxia if you're up at 10,000, 12,000 feet. And if you use oxygen, the oxygen's got no water in it, so it dehydrates you even faster. So it's got a major problem. So it adds up to fatigue, hypoxia, dehydration, much more frequently than flying in a power plane. Major problem. Next one. Well, we talked about that. No washout, stalls with no mush, burble, and the fact that you got so much adverse yaw. And particularly on takeoff, you'll be on a tow plane, and you've got this big long wing, and one wing drops. The immediate inclination of the power plane pilot is to apply aileron, okay, which increases the angle of attack on that wing, and so that wing stalls, and now the tip's on the ground. Whereas the correct answer is you stomp hard on the right rudder pedal and swing that wing so it's going faster and picks it up off the ground. Different kind of techniques. The other thing is, you guys are used to flying airplanes that are lots of drag. And so if you are in your 182 or whatever and you point it at the ground, it takes quite a while for it to get to red line. And you take a typical glider, which only has 20 pounds of drag, and you point the nose down at 45 degrees, you're going red line in about 3 seconds. Because they're slippery, you know, so. Okay, next one. And there's why, okay? You've got a laminar flow wing, you've got 18 pounds of drag versus 230 pounds of drag on the airplane. Makes a big difference. That's how fast it accelerates. At 45 degrees, you essentially accelerate at half G. I mean, it's that quick. Boom. Like being in a Ferrari. Next. No fuel or power limitations. So when you don't have to worry about the fuel, and you don't need the power, you hit a nice thermal, and thermals up in the desert, you know, most of you guys, if you've flown over the desert, not unusual to hit bumps at 16,000, 17,000 feet. So if you're in your glider, you go there, okay? And it's normal, okay? And as I said, our 5-hour duration is an entry-level accomplishment. So you're flying in conditions where this problem of oxygen and hydration and fatigue are something that you just kind of, I want to go out there and have fun. and you kind of inclined to forget about that and forget that, you know, you're a human and there's only so much of that you can take. So the fact that you don't have fuel or power limitations makes you freer, but it can make you pretty stupid as well. So next one. We race these things. So that was a typical, if that's Carson City up there, that goes out towards, you can see that Salt Lake City, the top right hand corner, and that direction. And that's a 400 or 500 mile flight. And in a typical national race, we race for 10 days and we'll do flights of a minimum of 300 to 400 miles every day for 10 days.
So is that course all over flat country?
No, it's all mountains.
It's all mountains.
Ranges of mountains between, yeah, right. Yeah. Next one. And there's $6 million worth of plastic on the runway, which is pretty typical national race day. And that gets fun when you launch them all, because one of the rules is you have to launch all the aircraft within 1 hour to be a sanctioned, you know, national event. So that means you've got 60 airplanes with 60 tows, that's 120 takeoffs, and 60 landings, that's 180 operations in an hour. So it gets kind of hectic on the ground. Next one. That was a race back a long time ago. That's my son and myself and my grandson. We flew a trainer in an exercise just for fun. Next one, okay. So a racing day, you get up, how dark, 100, and get the ship together, you have a pilot's meeting, flight planning, and you launch about midday, and you start within 1 hour of the first launch. So it's an all-day event to go race 300 or 400 miles, obviously, okay. Next one. And there's some airplanes, some gliders, current day kind of gliders on a finish. It's often you go around a 400 or 500 mile course and you all finish probably, even though everybody went a different way and they're flying different airplanes, you probably all will finish within 20 minutes of each other. It's amazing, you know, how that happens. Next one. So when we talk about speeds, and we just talked about this record of 155 mile an hour for 1,800 miles, you've got to remember that if you're thermaling, what's your ground speed? 0, okay? So if you thermal 50% of the time and you want to average 150 miles an hour, how fast do you have to be going in between the thermals? 300 miles an hour, and that's a bit over the red line. So in order, for example, to make 96 knots, and you thermal only 20% of the time, you have to be flying 120 knots the rest of the time in order to make those kind of speeds. So you thermal, you go like hell, and you get the next one, you know, that's how you progress, okay? Next one. Fortunately, we have some things which you see here regularly, especially along the Olympics, called cloud streets. The clouds tend to form parallel to the terrain. So the clouds, the air pushes, you know, that from your weather, remember your weather classes, you know, you need something to trigger the lift, okay? So the air pushes up the mountain, and then you get the thermal effect, and you get the cloud on the top, okay? So the clouds tend to follow that, and they're forming in waves of clouds. So you get these streets of clouds. So the fun thing to do is you get under one of those streets, instead of stopping and thermaling, you just slow the airplane down and it climbs up, and then go like hell between the next one, and you porpoise along from hopefully hundreds of miles, following the cloud street instead of doing the circling. That's Half Dome. Have you ever been to Yosemite Park? That's Half Dome from about 15,000 feet. And the final glide, oh yeah, here's an interesting thing. Once you get within range of the airport, close, you know, to your finish, maybe 50 miles away, you have two choices. I can climb to the top of this thermal that I'm in, all the way to the top, and then go as fast as I can, or I can just take a little less time and not climb so high, and then go slower and not lose as much altitude. And so we have flight computers that make that calculation. We used to have to do it ourselves, but now we have these flight computers, and it tells you when to leave the thermal for the optimum speed to get home. And sometimes they work. And if you put the right parameters in, and you put all the distances in nautical miles instead of knots, you get the right answers. A big part of soaring is, and I don't want to get too far into this, but if you can't do some prediction of the weather, you're never going to be a good soaring pilot, okay? So we learn a lot about weather. And in fact, you can do really good micro-weather predictions from just very little information. You need the average, the air temperature and the moisture content, the average ground temperature time profile for the day, and then the local frontal activity and adiabatic tables. And with that, I mean, on a typical day out here, just 24 hours ahead of time, you could predict with reasonable accuracy what the cloud base is going to be and how much lift there will be just from those 4 pieces of information. And I think all pilots ought to know a little bit about that because it really works. And you can also find pretty much the percentage of cloud cover that you're going to have too. So, next one. Water ballast. So we put water in the gliders to make it go fast because the theory is that the aerodynamics of the glider dictate the glide slope. So it's got to be 40 to 1, okay? But if it's like a roller skate, you put a big fat guy on a roller skate that goes down the hill faster than you know, a 100-pound lady on the same roller skate, okay? So you want to make it heavy to go faster. So the best glide occurs at a higher speed if you put weight in it. The problem is you're talking about pretty fragile, lightweight airplanes, and to land with 650 pounds of water in that airplane, you're going to punch the gear through the bottom of the airplane. So you'd like to get rid of it before you land. So that's what we do. We load them up with water. You trundle down the runway kind of like a B-52, trying to keep the wingtips off the ground. And then once you get it airborne, you know, the wings lift up like this. And then just before you land, which is what he's doing here, pulls the dump valves, and you reduce the weight of the airplane by 600 pounds while you're screaming up from red line back to pattern altitude speed, pattern speed. So there we go. Just so the question is, why not add lead? Well, the trouble is you can't throw the lead out of the window if the weather goes bad. And that's a picture. That's a 23-meter glider at the end of a very long day out in the middle of the Sacramento Valley. Actually, that was taken. So, national racing. This was just a day's. I took a typical day's racing. So those are the mileages of the races each day. So you can see that most of them are pretty, you know, 300 miles, 380 miles, 350 miles, and the speeds are 100, you know, close to 100 miles an hour. And this is back from the 90s, you know. So these days are going at least 30–40% faster than this in modern gliders. Okay, next. Gliders. Okay, well, it's an FAA pilot's license. Same as the power stuff. In fact, you know, the written is more or less the same, except the emphasis on the glider written is all on weather. We don't do a lot of electronic navigation, so we don't need to know much about VORs and that stuff. But we do know how to know about fronts and clouds and all that kind of stuff. So it's focused on weather more than anything else. You don't need a medical. So some of you guys are looking at life and saying, wonder how much longer I can fly. Well, if you don't renew your medical, so you don't fail it, because if you fail it, you can't fly anything. But if you don't fail it, and you start flying gliders, you don't need a medical, okay? And if you've got kids that want to get interested in flying, you can solo in the glider at 14, which is pretty cool. And we have kids do that every year at the Civil Air Patrol. And if you want information, you can get that from FAA, pilots, etc. And if you want info on soaring, you can do, actually the best thing to do is to go to the SSA, ssa.org, and they'll give you all kinds of information where you can go fly and all that kind of stuff. Okay, that's it. Compliments of Jody Mitchell. Any questions? Yes, sir.
Since oxygen is a huge problem being up at 30,000 feet,
yes.
Do you have spoilers or flaps or something so you can get down quick if your oxygen system fails?
Yes, sure do. Thank God for spoilers. You know, I have a hard time flying power planes because they don't have spoilers. You know, they just don't come down quick enough. Yeah, you can go.
Actually, we have these big black round things that come out of the wings.
Well, that helps. Yeah, but it's still not quite enough. So, the glider I have, for instance, is at normal speeds is 50 to 1. And you pull the boards out with the gear down, and it's 4 to 1. So it becomes a free-falling.
You also have that bailout model. You've got to have oxygen.
Yes, that's
interesting.
Yeah, if you fly high altitude, you have an oxygen bottle in your chute. So if you have to bail out, you've got oxygen until you get to 10,000 feet or whatever. Yeah, anybody? Yes, sir.
How many off airports or unscheduled landings have you had over your career?
You don't want to know. Over 30. Over 30. And that's one of the things actually I encourage. A lot of people that fly in contests, by the way, they're nearly all airline pilots. At least half the field is usually airline pilots. And they fly the gliders because it's real flying. You know, they get in a 747 and they're just punching buttons. And they fly the gliders because you fly it all the time. And the one thing that you learn really quick is you learn absolute precise landing techniques and energy management, because every landing is a dead stick landing and there are no go-arounds. So you learn how to handle that airplane, and it counts, you know. So off-field landings are something that I think every pilot should have experience at. And it's tougher in a power plane because it's kind of hard to get the thing out of there. Gliders come apart really easy. You know, you can take a glider apart in 20 minutes.
So typically call your ground crew and
Yeah,
bring the trailer.
bring the trailer over. Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, that's difficult to do in a power plane, and it's a good experience. And it's worthwhile just going out there and take an introductory lesson, and you can see how they're much more controllable aircraft because of the spoilers. In fact, a lot of people think, oh, as I said, you're the Lord Dart. You have not a lot of control over what you can do. But an example, I could come over here in Bremerton, 1,000 feet off the end of the runway, and still make it on the runway without, you know, breaking a sweat.
If anybody does want to get an introductory flight, how do they do that?
Well, there's two operations in this area. There's one up at Arlington, Evergreen Soaring, and there's one down at North Plains near Vancouver. It's actually near Hillsborough Airport.
Is there one near Enenklaw as well?
There is, yes. That's it's only open about 4 months of the year. That one, that's all.
What does it typically cost to?
An introductory flight's about $125. So you're paying for the tow plane and the tow pilot and the instructor and the glider. So it's not as cheap as a power flight, you know. But it's worth doing.
What kind of equipment does the glider have to have? A transponder, for example? I know you have a radio.
Yes, we have the same instrumentation as a power plane, except for we don't normally have electronic navigation system. We have GPS. We don't usually use VORs and stuff like that. Too much power requirement. Most gliders these days have two things. They have a transponder. And we have a system which you guys might be interested in. It's called FLARN, which is the equivalent of your ADS-B, but it only costs about $800 to put it in a glider. And if other glider, you'll see all the other gliders who have one of these little tanks about this big, and it just puts out a GPS signal, tells you what your position is and how fast you're going, and if you're within a certain range, it will show up on all the other units that are around in the area. It's a good device, and cheap. You know, I'm surprised they haven't adopted something like that for.
Is that going to keep you out of the ADS-B 2020 mandate?
Yes, you're right. Yeah, yeah. That's now, you know, in uncontrolled airspace, obviously, not in Class B airspace, but elsewhere it does. Yeah.
How often do you fly in Class B airspace?
Well, you know, when I'm flying up in the Minden area, for example, Reno, I think, is Class B, and we can fly into there. You have the same rights, basically. You know, Class B airspace is much more stringent, and you have to have mode C transponder. You can't just have a cheap, you know, altitude transponder. And you know, when I've been asked, you know, maintain altitude and so and so and so and so, and it's like, well, I'm a glider, how do you do that? And they say, well, you can't land here. You say, yes, I can. You know, this is a public airport, and if you don't want me to land there, I'll just declare an emergency, and then you don't have a choice. You know, and I don't do that, but you do have the right to do that. Yeah, I'd much rather go land in a field than go land in generally speaking, in a ATC under ATC control. But it does happen, you know. Yes, sir.
So I haven't read the FARs for gliders, but is there a special thing for gliders flying Class A or A airspace without filing IFR and that sort of thing?
Yeah, basically there is. You have to report, okay, But the only reason you can do that is that the place that you're flying in Class A airspace, it's above in 18,000 feet and above, is that there's that area, that operator has an MOU with the FAA for that specific area. And if you look at the charts, you'll see, on some charts, you'll see where that box is. And Minden is a south and a north area. They've got one over at North Bend, where there's a wave window over North Bend. And you have to open it from the ground. You can't open it from the air. So you call the ground, and the guy that owns the MOU calls the FAA and says, "I've got a glider that wants to go to 20,000 feet," and they will open that window. And you have to make an immediate contact with ATC at that point to do it. Anybody else?
Just one. My brain's going around the logistics of getting all those gliders off in an hour period of time.
It's a nightmare.
Do you have two runways? Do you? I mean,
sometimes, but it's done often on one runway. And
do you
we have
divide the runway into two runways? So you got some guys going left and some guys going right? Or?
Yeah. Well, generally what we do is stage the gliders midfield. So we don't use the entire runway. So the tow plane lands, and you got a line of gliders lined up, from center backwards. Okay. And the tow planes come in and land on the right. Most of the gliders are sort of training off in the grass at the side of the runway, and the tow planes come in and land and taxi up to the midsection, taxi in front of the front glider, will come up, gone. And it takes about, to do that on a 60 airplane deal like that, it takes about 10 or 11.
You can't use multiple tow planes?
Well, we have done, some people do dual tows, so they'll tow two gliders off at the same time on one glider.
I mean, one tow plane on deck and one taken off, and then the other's in position waiting for him.
Yeah, that's how we do it. They just like a gear wheel, and just everybody cycles into the system, But it's hectic, and you have a lot. You've got to have 3 or 4 people on the ground. You've got one single person whose sole job is to hook the glider up. You've got a crew that's lifting the wing and running the wing on the glider. So it has to be. It moves really fast. I can imagine.
But those are for sanctioned events.
Yeah, sanctioned events, right? Yeah. Yes, sir.
Sitting up for, I don't know, probably a couple of hours watching the gliders run out of Arlington.
Yes.
And I mean, this is fascinating to me because I've not been in a glider, and I've looked at them. I've talked to both the tow pilots and the glider pilots up at Arlington, and just asking question after question, and most have been pretty accommodating. Some it was, "You're in my way, son."
Yeah.
But and I think you answered some of that today, but I'm thinking you're coming in and you're saying, "Oh crud, I've misjudged it by 100 feet, or I got too low, or I got this or that," and yet those glider pilots, it seems like every one just nails the spot that they want to be at. And I think
You just have to be good.
That's the spoiler.
That's the spoilers that allow you to do that. Yeah.
But it's just it's like you just don't want to get low, do you? At that point.
No. See, high. It's if you're low, you're in trouble. But there are several things you can do if you do get low. Not around here. Well, actually, maybe even around here, because gliders, the glide ratio gets to be over 100 in ground effects. So you get really low, you get the nose down and get within a wingspan of the ground, and the thing will go forever.
Okay.
And that helps, but that's not a good place to be. The best place is to be higher, 50% higher than you really need to be. Because then all you got to do is pull the spoilers out, and if you want to side slip it, and it comes down like a brick.
Okay.
And it doesn't go over. Not like a power plane. You put the nose down, and the thing starts to overspeed. You don't have that problem. And the ones that we train the cadets in, it's a Blanik, it's a Czechoslovakian aluminum glider, about 18-meter wingspan, and you pull the boards, if the gear down and the boards out all the way, and you can point the thing virtually directly at the ground, and it won't go over 60 knots. I mean, straight down. So they're huge. They're dive brake. In the case of the Blanik, they're actually dive brakes. They're not spoilers there, and they're extremely effective.
How about on the tow out? Would the glider get in dirty air behind the tow plane?
You just got to be good. I mean, it's the same problem.
Okay,
you get all that torque and everything else going on behind the plane. That's the trickiest part of the flight. That's the thing that takes the longest for the cadets to get a handle on that. That's the last thing they actually learn, because that's tough, because you've got unpredictable air, and part of the problem is the glider, of course, takes off earlier, so you're off the ground while the tow plane's still rolling, and you don't want to get high. You put his prop in the ground. You don't want to get low, because you'll hit the ground. Obviously, you don't want to hit the ground at that speed. So you've got to learn to fly. Best place is about 4 feet off the ground, right directly behind the tow plane. And if there's wind, and he has, you help him crab into the wind if you have to. Okay. So you're helping to position the glider on the runway in a crosswind.
Of course,
Tricky stuff.
he's feeling every bit of you back there, right?
He feels every bit of you,
and he's either loving you or hating you, right?
Yeah, and if he hates you, he's this big yellow knob on the front of it, and he just goes, you collect 200 feet of rope in your face.
Is that, how that's probably not common, though, is it?
No.
Yeah, to turn loose a glider, just say, hey, I've had enough of you?
Well, it happens. I mean, like I'm looking at the weather out here today. I would guess that that's fairly turbulent up there, and it's the cloud base is fairly low. So we took off from here, and you were in. They wouldn't dump you so that you're in trouble, but if he decides he doesn't have full control of that tow plane, he may dump you at 500 feet. He knows you can turn around at 200 feet. You can turn the glider around, put it back on the runway, downwind. That's not possible with a power plane. So I've been dumped like that a couple of times, and taken off, and all of a sudden you hit the rotor, and you go, oh shit, and pull release, and you go back.
So not necessarily because of something that you've done, but he just feels like, or he or she, whoever's towing you, feels like they're compromised.
Yeah, he just hit a 7G gust. That's a typical cause. He said, I'm not going to do this,
But the most typical thing is the glider pilot pulls a release because it's just too rough.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, so you can't stay behind the tow plane, so you just, I'm out of here, and go back and land.
What if you get into IMC? How does that work?
You don't.
No.
I mean, it does happen, but I don't have any IMC equipment in my glider, and there are people. In fact, the day that record was broken, there was a guy in a glider at Linden at the same time, and he got caught when the cloud closed up under him, and he tried to fly back down through the cloud, and he lost it, and lost control of the airplane, and it broke up. He bailed out.
Well, that was the pony.
No, it was a glider.
It was a glider.
Yeah. And, so it happens. I don't know. I've heard different techniques. People say just pull the spoilers out, go into a 30-degree angle of bank, and hands off, and just let itself spiral down through the cloud, and don't just sit there and be a passenger for a few minutes till you get through the bottom, and hopefully that you're still above the terrain.
When you're in turbulence, you're talking about some of those rotor clouds and everything else, the things that fixed-wing pilots avoid
like
at all, like the plague.
Yeah.
But when you're in some of that would create fixed-wing pilots some pretty gnarly ride.
Yes.
Is the turbulence softer because of the long wings in the glider? Would it wouldn't be as abrupt, perhaps?
In a fiberglass glider, that's very true, because they flap. You saw that picture in the front. The wings will flap up and down 6 feet.
Okay.
So but kind of what happens is it's softer, but you'll hit a pocket, and the glider will go down, and the wings will flex, and then boing. It's like being on a bungee cord. But the Blaniks, the ones that we teach the cadets in, and several older gliders are all metal, and they don't. They're just solid, and you hit one of those things, and it just sounds like an oil can. It's
really.
Yeah.
Okay. So pretty abrupt turbulence then.
Right.
And is that unnerving?
Well, yeah, the first time it happens, I would say so. Yeah. Take a dry pair of underwear, the other. Yeah, it is unnerving, but what happens is as you progress, you learn how to deal with those kind of conditions, and it becomes less intimidating the more often you do it, But if you're not willing to fly in some of that rough kind of weather, you're not going to go anywhere in a glider, because you're looking for instability, because that's what we use to maintain altitude.
Room for that here.
No, never find that here. Right? Yes, sir.
You mentioned bailing out a couple of times.
Yeah.
Are parachutes a requirement or just a good idea?
It's a good idea. In flying in contests in the U.S., it's not required in Europe, but in the U.S., that's a requirement is you wear a chute. And frankly, you know, any glider that's capable of this kind of performance, I'll wear a chute. Now, we don't wear the chutes with the cadets and the trainers because we very seldom go, you know, further than gliding distance from the airport. So we're not worried about having to do something happening. The gliders are really well maintained. They're, you know, they're.
Well, there's no problem getting out of the glider. The canopy comes loose, and you can bail out.
Yeah, they have. Usually, they have. It's not an ejection, but they have a latch that allows the front of the canopy to come up. So as soon as that comes up in the airstream, it just blows away, and then you know you've got a wide open area to get out of the airplane.
Are they insured? Are they insured?
Yes. Oh yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, a lot of these high performance, like that 22-meter airplane I'm talking about. I mean, they're as expensive as power planes, and you're talking about a $200,000 glider, you know, without an engine. So,
Wow.
But Ian, it seems to me a lot of the first rides you get in a glider are in a fabric covered glider, an old kind of glider.
Yep.
And there's nothing in the glider.
Nothing. Nope.
There's nothing. There's an airspeed indicator, which you ignore. There's an altimeter that doesn't work.
That's right.
And there's a stick, and there's this
spoilers.
And that's
right.
it.
Houses get bigger, houses get smaller.
Yeah.
That's 40 knots. That's 70 knots. That's all you need to know.
That's kind of disconcerting for power. I mean,
it is, yeah. But you know what? It's disconcerting, but on the other hand, you take some of these young guys, you know, you've met some of them 15, 16 years of age, and you put them in a power plane, and the first time you say to them, well, you know, fly in a circle at 30-degree angle of bank, and they will nail the airspeed every time, okay? Because they're not looking at the airspeed indicator. They fly the airplane by the attitude, because that's what they learned. First day they got in an airplane, they know that the attitude is the airspeed. Okay, and if they want to climb, it's power. So if you want to go down, it's like pull the spoilers out. Okay, pull the throttle out, the airplane goes down. Put the throttle in, the airplane goes up. And they learn those basic principles, which I just as this is a personal opinion and nothing to do with the presentation, but I think that's a major problem we have with all this glass panel stuff. You get these people who don't know the basics of how to fly an airplane, and they're sitting there looking at all the dials, and they fly the damn airliner right into the end of the runway in San Francisco, because they haven't realized the damn thing's been stalled for the last 4 minutes, you know. And I think that's one of the things that this you know, training in a glider really teaches these kids from the get-go, that how to fly, the principles of flying the airplane, which they don't get from some of this other stuff. So that's just a personal opinion. Yes, sir.
How many hours does it take to get a glider rating for a pilot, who's already a private pilot?
Power pilots take about twice as long as 14-year-old cadets.
Is that like helicopters?
It's like helicopters, yeah. Actually, not too long. I would say most competent pilots can get a rating in 20 flights, okay, which is a typical half-hour flight or something. Okay. The biggest problem that they have, that I've seen with power pilots, is that the first thing is you're flying a tail dragger. Most gliders are tail draggers. Tail sits on the ground. So they're not used to that idea when they're rolling down on takeoff. You've got to get the nose, you've got to get the tail up, okay, get the thing flying. And the second, and by far the biggest problem, is that 99%, present company accepted, 99% of the power pilots I know think that those things that are on the floor down by your feet are footrests. And when you fly a glider, a long-wing glider, it's got more adverse yaw than you've ever imagined. And if you're not pedaling away on those rudder pedals, you're going to have a problem. And it takes a long time for power pilots to realize that. So, you know, when you initiate the turn, for example, even on a trainer, and you move the stick, the nose just goes the wrong way. And so you've got to fly properly coordinated, and it takes some gliders are so big that you have to actually lead. You put the left foot in first, and then you put the stick over. You know, some of them are so bad that actually what you do is you put right sticking for us to cause some adverse yaw, so the thing starts rotating that way, and then you put the rudder in, and then you put opposite stick in, because they're big and they have lots of yaw inertia too. So that's it's sort of a hard mental transition for the guys used to sitting there with his feet on the footrest, you know.
And if anybody's interested in doing this, either initially or some recurrent stuff, can they contact you?
Absolutely,
Some
yeah,
pointers
yeah.
about how to
Yeah.
get
In fact,
started?
one of the things I was going to say, you were talking earlier about issue of dwindling membership. You know, we have the same thing in the glider community. You know, most of the people who own 150,000 gliders, you know, they got a little grey hair and you've been around for a while, so they have a hard time in getting new, you know, young blood into the sport. And you know, I've been really impressed with the Civil Air Patrol. They have a great program, and anybody that's flying, that's got an interest in helping young kids along and wants to be involved in flying, get involved in the CAP. We fly down at Chehalis in the summer. We have a 10-day camp over in Nefredo. We usually get 20, 25 kids over there, and we teach them to fly. And they get they get a solo in a glider for less than $1,000, which and plus accommodation and food for 10 days. I mean, it's unbeatable.
And all those events are on the SSA's website?
Yeah, or Civil Air Patrol, one or the other. Yeah. So if you want to get involved, I mean, a good way to do it is to get involved in the Civil Air Patrol, and you get to fly. If you're interested, you know, we've got guys that fly. When they do search. They don't do rescue, but they do a lot of search stuff. People go up in the mountains and get lost, and we go look for them. You know, planes go down in places that you can't find them. So the Civil Air Patrol does a lot of that stuff. But the thing that I'm involved in, which involves the cadets, is the glider program, and we teach young. You know, they said 14. I had seven solos. Wouldn't you love to have 7 new members in your club? That's where the action is. You've got these young guys learning to fly, and if you want more members, go participate and get involved with those young people and get them in there, get them into the fold. You know, that's what I would suggest. And you're welcome. You know, you can call me. I can give you my email address. Well, it's on the roster, right? I think, yeah.
I have it, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I'd be happy to point you in the right direction if you want to do that. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
I just have one about logistics on a typical flight. I mean, how many? You obviously can't do this all by yourself.
That's right. Yeah.
So how does the logistically, like, if you want to go fly today, what would you have to do that?
Well, that depends. I mean, if you want to go, if you don't have your own glider, okay, it makes it rather simple. You drive up to Evergreen or wherever you go, you call them on the phone the day before, and you book a glider. I want a glider at 12 o'clock, you know, for 3 hours. And then usually they prepare it, the battery's charged, they've got everything there. And you have to be checked out, you have to have an area checkout and an equipment checkout, so you know you can fly that airplane and you know that area. And you do that ahead of time, obviously. And then you drive up there and you get in the airplane. They've got people on the ground that push the glider out. They'll hook you up. You have to know the signals, you know, of how to get the tow plane to maneuver. And those are standard. We use standard SSA, Soaring Society of America signals to do that. And then they tow you up and you go fly, come back and pay the bill. That's the tough part. Now, if you own your own glider and you keep it at home or whatever, and then it's in a trailer, then you've got to get it out to the glider operation, call up, make sure there's a tow plane there, and tow the glider out there, and you've got to take it out of the box and put it together. And some of the big gliders are hard. It's almost impossible to put it together on your own. But we have a 24-meter glider up in Arlington. It's got a full one-person rigging, so it has these things. You roll the glider wings out of the trailer, and it has a little dolly that it sits on, and you turn it around and point it at the fuselage, and it rolls into the fuselage, and you put the pins in, and you can theoretically do it by yourself.
And the safety wire.
Yeah, yeah, right, lots of safety wire, and duct tape as well. Now the problem is if there's any wind, that becomes almost impossible. So you really need a person to help you assemble the glider. And then if it doesn't have a motor, you've got to push it out there. A lot of them, what we have is what's called ground handling gear, so you'll have a little dolly. This is a tail dragger, remember, it's a single wheel. So you lift the tail up and you put this dolly on, it's got a little caster, you know, on the bottom of it. and it's got a bar that hooks on the back of your car. So you put it on the tow, and then you tow the thing down to the end of the runway, and take the bar off, and remember to take the tail dolly off, because it does move the CG back a little bit. And then once you're in the air, you're on your own. And if you're good, you come back. If you're not good, you land somewhere else, and you have to call somebody up and say, "Bring my trailer over."
And you've got the right wife.
Yeah, I mean, you got to have the right wife. That's right. Yeah. Or a son, or somebody that's involved in it that likes to do that. Yes, sir.
Kids solo at 14, or
Yes.
can solo at 14. What's the
Correct.
youngest it makes sense to give a kid a lesson to?
12. Yeah, and they normally can handle it at 12. And I've had kids that they're solo level pilot. I mean, I've had a couple of them that you would almost say these guys flying at commercial level precision. At 13 years old, they've been flying for a summer and they got it. But they're not allowed to solo until they're 14. Yeah, you'd be amazed. I mean, some of these cadets are just absolutely incredible. Well, young people, it's like computers. They give them the opportunity, they pick it up, and it's no brainer for them. Those old farts have a more difficult time with it.
Suffering from too many birthdays.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Any other questions?
Thank you very much, Ian. That was terrific.
Okay.